Hey guys, today I am making a gorgeous fall meal. I'm going to show you how easy and delicious it can be to go from this to this. Ah. Why don't we start our cooking off today with showing you the ingredients you're going to need for this recipe. So right here I have squash, of course, a butternut squash. But if you do not have butternut squash on hand, use any kind of squash, really any kind probably, but spaghetti squash will work. So I have used also acorn and buttercup squash for this recipe. We've also got milk, cream cheese, some mustard, hot sauce, salt and pepper, onion, garlic, sharp or old cheddar cheese, and of course our macaroni noodles. I'm going to start by cooking up my squash. Now, if you have already cooked squash or squash puree, maybe you've got babies at home and you have squash baby food you could use instead, awesome. You can skip this step. But what I'm doing here is, this is a squash I picked from my garden and it has been washed. I'm just going to go ahead and peel it and dice it up into 1-inch chunks. Now I'm going to throw that in my pot and add about 1.5 cups of water. It doesn't have to be exact. As you can see, I'm just eyeballing it here. And then we're gonna get that coming to a boil on the stove and reduce it to a simmer. I find it takes about 20 to 30 minutes to get these squash chunks nice and tender for pureeing. While we're waiting for the squash to cook, let's get our water boiling for the macaroni noodles. And you're going to cook up here about 4 to 5 cups of dry macaroni. Now this is a 900-gram package that I'm using, so that gives you an idea as well. If you're a Canadian and it's going by grams what you're buying, we don't always get things sold in poundage, so this is about 900 grams. All right, my squash is now nice and soft. It's ready to mash up. So what I'm going to do here is simply use my handy little Pampered Chef tool to mash up my squash chunks. And you'll notice here that I did not drain or strain the water out. I'm leaving the water in there because I want that to kind of thin out the squash a little bit. So I'm giving it a good mash. Now in a separate pot, what we're going to do is pop in a couple tablespoons of butter to melt, and then putting in 1 medium onion that has been grated. I do find that using grated onion for this recipe is a little better, just because not everybody likes chunks of onion in their recipes. And I also have 2 garlic cloves that have been minced. So we're going to brown those up so they're good and tender and cooked. And then into that pot goes 1 brick of light cream cheese. This is about 1 cup for those of you who don't measure things in bricks. And added to that, we have 2 cups of milk. Now for some of the spices that give a bit of the kick. We need 1 teaspoon of salt, 1 teaspoon of pepper, as well as 2 teaspoons of mustard. If you don't have real mustard on hand, you could just use dry mustard powder as well. It's just gonna give a little bit of flavor. And then we wanna put in just a couple dashes of hot sauce. Now what I'm going to do is add in all of that squash. The amount of squash I'm cooking up is about 4 to 5 cups of diced raw squash, or the equivalent to 1 medium butternut squash. But you can play around with this if you want less or more in the recipe. It's totally up to you. Now I'm going to use my nifty immersion blender to give these ingredients a nice blend. If you don't have an immersion blender, you could do this in batches in a just countertop blender, or use a hand mixer. Whatever tools you have on hand, feel free to use them. So I'm going to use this immersion blender to get my sauce nice and smooth. You can see already it's turning kind of a neat yellowy color. It looks cheesy even though I haven't even added really any cheese to it aside from the cream cheese. Once that is all blended, I'm going to add in 2 cups of grated sharp or old cheddar cheese, orange. It just gives it that nice color. So I'm gonna add that in, and my heat is still on in my sauce so that it can kind of come to a bubble. My macaroni noodles have now finished cooking, so I have drained them and returned them to their big pot. To this, I'm going to add all of that yummy, squashy, cheesy sauce. If you find that you have too much sauce for the amount of noodles you have, that's okay, but I did want to say that the final step of this recipe is to bake this macaroni in the oven. So even though you think it may be too much on the saucy side, saucy, if you think it's a little too watery, when it bakes, you'll be surprised at how much that sauce kind of solidifies and the noodles expand even a bit more. So that's another point. Just make sure the noodles are only cooked to al dente. Do not overcook your macaroni noodles. Once I've mixed this all up, I am putting it in my stone 9x13 pan. You can put it in any 9x13 or casserole dish that you want, or separate it into 2 dishes because this is a large amount. And I'm going to top it with some breadcrumbs. Okay, this is a little money saver tip for anybody who's watching. What do you guys do with the end of your breads, like those crust ends? Do you eat them, or do you have picky kids like myself, or even myself if I'm honest, who don't really like to eat that crust? What do you do with them? Do you compost them? Do you throw them out? Well, at our house, we put them into a massive Ziploc bag in our freezer. And we turn all of those bread ends into homemade croutons, homemade breadcrumbs, stuffing for Thanksgiving or Christmas. We use those bread ends all of the time for many different recipes. And that's exactly what I'm going to do here. So I simply took 4 end pieces out of that Ziploc bag in our freezer, and I've chopped them up fine, and I'm sprinkling them on top of my casserole. Now here's where you can get creative with your casserole. You can top on top of this bread. Do you want to put some cooked bacon bits or some more shredded cheese to melt? Tonight for my family, I'm going to sprinkle it with some Italian herbs and spices, as well as a little pinch of paprika. Once you've done this, pop your casserole uncovered in the oven on 350 degrees for 30 minutes, or until it's really bubbling, smells good, and is starting to brown just a tiny bit on the top. Now it's going to be hot, so make sure that you let this dish sit for 10 to 15 minutes before you serve it to your family. Thank you so much for joining me in my kitchen today. If you found this video easy to follow and a recipe that looks like one you'd really like to try, make sure you click that like button below. And as a little teaser for my subscribers, make sure you're subscribed if you're not yet. Anyway, subscribers, stay tuned this fall because I'm going to have more recipes that feature squash, ones that your family's going to enjoy, even those who aren't necessarily squash lovers. Coming up are links to more of my cooking videos with lots of different tips and advice on how to live on less in your kitchen. So let's keep this watch party going, you guys. I can't wait to see you in the next video. For the least, this is Jen.